My boss used his position to humiliate everyone beneath him, so I made sure his downfall came from someone he never saw coming, me. I was 24, working as an assistant at Davidson & Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm where my boss Trevor treated everyone beneath him like personal servants. Trevor had this thing where he'd humiliate people in meetings, not just criticism, but calculated psychological warfare designed to break you down. He'd make junior employees stand while he berated them, force people to work weekends on fake urgent projects, then laugh about it Monday morning. The worst part? Trevor was untouchable. His uncle owned the company. Dad had connections. Everyone just accepted that working there meant enduring his sadistic power trips. Let me paint you a picture of what working for Trevor was actually like. Every morning he'd arrive at 10:30, despite demanding everyone else be there by 8 morning, with his expensive coffee and designer suit, looking like he owned the world. Which, in our little corner of it, he basically did. His first order of business was always the same: find someone to torment. It could be anything. Your report formatting was wrong. Your email response took too long. You breathed too loudly during a phone call. Trevor had this supernatural ability to find fault in literally everything, and he'd deliver his criticism with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a serial killer. I watched good people quit after Trevor's treatment. He made our graphic designer, Kelly, cry in front of clients by calling her work amateur garbage that my nephew could do better. Kelly had 15 years of experience and a portfolio that would make most agencies jealous. But Trevor needed his daily dose of power, and Kelly was convenient. He forced our accountant, Dennis, to redo perfectly fine reports 7 times just because he could. Dennis would stay until midnight, recalculating numbers that were already correct, just to avoid Trevor's wrath the next morning. When Dennis finally snapped and asked what was wrong with the reports, Trevor smiled that predatory smile and said, "Everything. Do it again." When anyone complained to HR, Trevor's uncle would suggest they might be happier elsewhere. The message was clear. This is Trevor's kingdom, and you're just lucky to be allowed inside. But here's what nobody knew about me. I'd been documenting everything since my second week. It started small. I'd write down particularly cruel comments in a notebook. Then I realized I needed more evidence, so I started recording conversations on my phone. Trevor was so confident in his untouchability that he never bothered to moderate his behavior. He'd say things that would get any normal person fired immediately, like the time he told Kelly that women were naturally worse at design because they were too emotional to think logically, or when he informed Dennis that people from your background weren't cut out for high-level financial work. Dennis was Puerto Rican, in case the casual racism wasn't obvious enough. The more I documented, the clearer the pattern became. Trevor wasn't just a bad boss. He was a predator who got sexual satisfaction from destroying people's confidence and careers. He'd target whoever seemed most vulnerable on any given day and systematically tear them down until they either quit or broke completely. Being awkward and desperate for the paycheck, of course, I kept my head down, but I was building a case. The first major incident I captured on video happened during our quarterly review meeting. Trevor had called everyone into the conference room to discuss performance improvements. What he actually did was spend 2 hours systematically humiliating each person in front of their coworkers. He started with Bryce, our junior consultant. Bryce was 22, fresh out of college, and eager to prove himself. Trevor had been setting him up for failure for weeks, giving him impossible deadlines, contradictory instructions, and no support. When Bryce inevitably struggled, Trevor pounced. "Bryce," Trevor said, his voice dripping with false concern, "I'm starting to wonder if you're actually capable of handling professional responsibilities." Bryce shifted uncomfortably. "I've been working really hard." "Working hard?" Trevor interrupted. "Hard work would mean getting results. What you've been doing is wasting everyone's time." I had my phone discreetly recording under the table. Trevor's uncle was out of town that week, which meant Trevor felt even more free to unleash his true personality. "Let's look at your report from last week," Trevor continued, pulling out a document. "Can you explain to everyone why this is completely worthless?" The report was actually fine. I'd helped Bryce with it myself. But Trevor had decided Bryce needed to be destroyed. So destroyed he would be. For 20 minutes, Trevor picked apart every sentence, every formatting choice, every word. He made Bryce explain his thought process for decisions that were completely standard. He questioned Bryce's education, his intelligence, his work ethic, and his future prospects in the industry. By the end, Bryce was visibly shaking. His voice cracked when he tried to respond. Sweat stains were visible under his arms despite the office being perfectly climate-controlled. "I think," Trevor said finally, "you need to seriously consider whether this career path is right for you." Bryce quit the next day. I found him cleaning out his desk at 6:00 a.m. trying to avoid having to see anyone. "I can't do this anymore," he told me, his eyes red from crying. "I thought I was smart. I graduated top of my class. But Trevor's right. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." I wanted to tell him the truth, that Trevor was a psychopath who destroyed good people for sport, but I couldn't reveal what I knew. Not yet. After Bryce left, I called him and explained what had really happened. I played him the audio recordings of Trevor laughing about breaking the new kid and bragging to his golf buddies about how easy it was to make college graduates cry. "That bastard," Bryce whispered. "He did it on purpose." "Every bit of it," I confirmed. "Your report was perfect. He just needed someone to torture that day." Bryce was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to destroy him," I said simply, "but I need more evidence first." That became my mission. By day, I played the role of submissive assistant. I said yes, sir, and right away and absorbed Trevor's abuse like a sponge. But by night, I was building the case that would end his career. I learned Trevor's patterns. He was most vicious on Mondays. Weekend cocaine binges left him irritable and looking for outlets. He targeted women more often than men, but he was careful to spread his abuse around enough that it couldn't be called gender discrimination. He saved his worst behavior for when his uncle was traveling, which happened twice a month. 3 months into my documentation project, I discovered Trevor's first major vulnerability. He was stealing. It started with little things I noticed while organizing files. Client invoices that didn't match our internal records. Expense reports with suspicious charges. Money going out that couldn't be accounted for. At first, I thought it might be honest mistakes, but the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. Trevor was skimming money from client accounts and hiding it through a web of false charges and phantom expenses. I spent weeks tracing the money. Trevor had set up a shell company called Strategic Solutions Consulting that billed our clients for services that didn't exist. The payments went to a business account that Trevor controlled. He was stealing roughly $3,000 per month, not enough to trigger automatic audits, but enough to fund his expensive lifestyle. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Trevor spent his days telling people they were worthless while literally stealing money to pay for his designer clothes and weekend drug habits. But I needed more than financial evidence. I needed to catch Trevor being himself, the monster he hid behind his expensive suit and fake charm. The opportunity came when Trevor's abuse escalated beyond anything I'd seen before. It happened to our receptionist, Madison. She was 19, working part-time while attending community college. Madison was sweet, hardworking, and completely innocent of office politics, which made her perfect prey for Trevor. The trouble started when Madison accidentally transferred a client call to the wrong extension. It was a minor mistake, the kind that happens dozens of times per day in any office. But Trevor saw an opportunity. "Madison," he called out from across the office. "Come here." Madison walked over, looking nervous. She could sense something was wrong. "Did you transfer the Hartwell call to extension 247? Trevor asked. "Yes, That was wrong." Trevor cut her off. "The call should have gone to 245. Madison's face fell. "I'm sorry. I can call them back and—" "No," Trevor said sharply. "The damage is done. Because of your mistake, we look unprofessional." This was insane. The client had been transferred to the right department, just a different person within that department. It was the kind of non-error that gets corrected in 30 seconds with no consequences, but Trevor was just getting started. "This is part of a pattern with you," he continued, his voice getting louder so everyone in the office could hear. "Last week you were 3 minutes late. Yesterday I saw you checking your phone during work hours." Madison looked confused. She'd been 2 minutes late exactly once because her bus broke down, and she'd glanced at her phone when her mom texted about a family emergency. "I think we need to discuss whether this job is too challenging for you," Trevor said. That's when I realized what was happening. Trevor had decided Madison needed to be destroyed, and he was building his case in real time, in front of the entire office. I discreetly started recording. For the next 10 minutes, Trevor systematically tore Madison apart. He questioned her intelligence, her work ethic, her appearance, and her future prospects. He brought up every minor mistake she'd ever made and twisted them into evidence of incompetence. Madison started crying halfway through the assault, which only encouraged Trevor. "See?" he said, gesturing at her tears. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Professional environments require emotional stability." By the end, Madison was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. Trevor dismissed her to think about whether this job is really right for her, and she fled to the bathroom. I found her there 20 minutes later, having a full panic attack. "I can't breathe," she gasped. "I can't breathe." I helped her get to her car and followed her home to make sure she was okay. Madison lived with her mom and younger sister in a small apartment. She needed this job to pay for school. "I don't understand what I did wrong," she kept saying. "I try so hard to do everything right." That night, I made a decision. I was done collecting evidence. It was time to act. But first, I needed to understand Trevor's schedule and find the perfect moment to strike. Trevor's downfall needed to be public, devastating, and permanent. The opportunity came 3 weeks later. Our biggest potential client, Meridian Industries, was coming in for a presentation that could secure a 7-figure contract. Trevor had been preparing for months, taking credit for work our entire team had done. But here's what Trevor didn't know. I'd been in contact with someone at Meridian for months. Not officially, of course. My college roommate's girlfriend worked in their procurement department. Through casual conversations, I'd learned exactly what Meridian was looking for in a consulting partnership. I'd also learned something crucial about Meridian's CEO, Mr. Richardson. His father had built the company after being humiliated by a previous boss who'd destroyed his confidence and nearly derailed his career. Mr. Richardson had made it company policy to cut ties immediately with any vendor that mistreated employees. This information gave me the perfect weapon against Trevor. But I also discovered something else that made my revenge even sweeter. Mr. Richardson's procurement department had been secretly investigating their potential partners. They'd heard rumors about problems at Davidson and Associates and were looking for confirmation. I anonymously sent them some of my recordings. Then Trevor crossed a line that changed everything. My younger brother was in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but he needed surgery. I requested time off to be with him. Trevor denied it. "Family emergencies are just excuses for weak people," he announced in front of the entire office. "If you can't prioritize this company, maybe you don't belong here." When I tried to explain that my brother needed surgery, Trevor cut me off. "Your brother's probably fine. Stop being dramatic." The office went dead silent. Even by Trevor's standards, this was cruel. That night, my brother texted from his hospital bed, "Don't worry about visiting. I know work's important." My stomach dropped. He was protecting me from my own boss. I spent that evening with my brother instead of at home preparing for the Meridian presentation. While I sat beside his hospital bed, watching him try to be brave, I finalized my plan for Trevor's destruction. The next morning, I arrived at work early to make final preparations. I'd prepared multiple backup plans, but I was hoping for the most dramatic scenario possible. Trevor arrived late, as usual, already stressed about the presentation. His uncle was out of town again, which meant Trevor felt free to be his worst self. "Where's the final presentation deck?" he barked at me. "On your desk," I replied calmly. He flipped through it looking for things to criticize. "This slide is wrong. Fix it." The slide was perfect. I'd spent hours perfecting every detail. "What's wrong with it?" I asked. "Everything," he snapped. "Just fix it." This was classic Trevor, creating busy work to assert dominance, but I played along. "And when Meridian Industries gets here," he continued, "you'll stand in the corner and take notes. Don't speak unless I tell you to." "Of course," I said. What Trevor didn't realize was that I'd spent the morning preparing a completely different presentation, one that told the real story of Davidson and Associates. Hidden in my laptop was everything. Financial records showing Trevor's embezzlement, video recordings of his abuse, audio of him admitting to falsifying reports. I'd also prepared a detailed dossier on every employee Trevor had driven away, complete with exit interview recordings I'd secretly made. The pattern of abuse was undeniable. When the Meridian team arrived, Trevor was in full performance mode. He introduced himself with his usual arrogance, clearly expecting to charm them with his fake charisma. "Welcome to Davidson and Associates," he said with his practiced smile. "I'm Trevor Davidson, senior partner and head of client services." He wasn't actually a partner, and the senior title was completely made up, but Trevor had been lying about his position for so long that he probably believed it himself. He gestured dismissively in my direction. "This is my assistant. He handles the paperwork while the real professionals discuss strategy." Mr. Richardson looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Yet, Trevor launched into his presentation, taking credit for work our entire team had done. He mispronounced technical terms and got basic facts wrong. I could see the Meridian team exchanging glances. They were already losing confidence. When one of Meridian's technical managers asked a detailed question about implementation timelines, Trevor turned to me. "Get me the Henderson file," he barked, "and make it quick." There was no Henderson file. Trevor was just trying to make me scramble to cover his ignorance. It was a power play he'd used dozens of times before, but this time, I was ready. I stood up slowly. "Actually," I said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Trevor's face darkened. He wasn't used to being contradicted, especially in front of clients. "Excuse me? The information you're looking for is already in the presentation," I said calmly. "Section 3 covers implementation timelines in detail. I can walk through the specifics if you'd like." The room went silent. Trevor's eye twitched, his tell when he was about to explode. "Sit down," he hissed. "Now." I looked directly at Mr. Richardson. "Sir, I've been working on this account for 8 months. I know every detail of your requirements, your budget constraints, and your timeline. Would you like me to walk you through the actual proposal?" Trevor lunged forward, but Mr. Richardson held up his hand. "Yes," he said calmly. "I'd like to hear what you have to say." What happened next was 40 minutes of pure satisfaction. I presented the work our team had actually done, not Trevor's distorted version, but the real proposal we'd developed. I answered every technical question with precision. I provided detailed cost breakdowns and realistic timelines. I explained exactly how we'd meet Meridian's needs. Trevor sat frozen, watching his carefully constructed facade crumble. When I finished, Mr. Richardson nodded approvingly. "Impressive work. Who was the project lead on this?" "I was," I said simply. Trevor finally found his voice. "That's not true. He's just an assistant. I supervised every aspect of this project." Mr. Richardson looked at Trevor, then back at me. "Can you prove that?" I pulled out my laptop. "Every email, every draft, every revision, it's all timestamped. I can show you the entire development process." Trevor's face went white. He knew exactly what my files would reveal. "There's something else," I said, addressing Mr. Richardson directly. "Before you make any decisions about partnering with this company, you should know how they actually operate." This was the moment I'd been planning for months. I started with the audio recording of Trevor telling our accountant to falsify billing records for another client. The Meridian team's faces went from confusion to shock. Then I played the video of Trevor screaming at Kelly until she broke down crying. Mr. Richardson's jaw tightened as he watched Trevor's cruelty. Next came the recording of Trevor bragging to his friend about breaking new employees and how much he enjoyed making college graduates cry. But the real nuclear option was the financial evidence. I displayed Trevor's embezzlement scheme on the projector, the fake shell company, the fraudulent invoices, the stolen money. Over the past 18 months, I explained, Trevor has stolen approximately $54,000 from client accounts through this system. The room was dead silent. Mr. Richardson stood up slowly. "I think we've seen enough," he said, his voice cold with disgust. He looked at Trevor with pure contempt. "We'll be taking our business elsewhere." As the Meridian team filed out, Mr. Richardson paused at my desk. "If you ever want to work for a company that values talent over politics, give me a call." He handed me his business card and left. Trevor was shaking with rage. "You're fired!" he screamed. "Security! Get him out of here!" "Actually," came a voice from the conference room doorway, "I think we need to have a conversation first." Trevor's uncle stood there, his face grim. He'd returned from his trip early and had been watching from the hallway for the last 10 minutes. "My office, both of you, now." In his uncle's office, the conversation was brief and brutal. Trevor tried to explain, to minimize, to blame me for sabotaging the company. His uncle listened without expression, occasionally glancing at the evidence I'd presented. Trevor, he said finally, you just cost us a 7-figure contract, and apparently, you've been stealing from us. Uncle Bill, that's not— Don't call me uncle, Bill Davidson cut him off. I've been getting complaints about you for months. Clients, employees, other business partners. I kept hoping you'd mature, but this is the final straw. He turned to me. Do you have more evidence? I handed him a USB drive containing everything I'd gathered over the past year. Financial irregularities, recorded conversations, client complaints that had been buried, documentation of Trevor's systematic abuse of employees. Bill plugged in the drive and scrolled through the files, his expression growing darker with each page. Jesus Christ, Trevor, you've been running a criminal enterprise out of my company. Trevor tried to speak, but Bill cut him off. You're terminated immediately. I'm calling the police about the embezzlement. Security will escort you out, and if you ever set foot in this building again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. He looked at me. As for you, I'm promoting you to senior account manager, 40% salary increase, your own team, and full authority to restructure our client services department. Can you start immediately? I looked at Trevor, who was staring at me with pure hatred. Yes, I said. I can start right now. Trevor was escorted out by security 20 minutes later. As he walked past my desk, now cleared of his personal belongings, he stopped and hissed. This isn't over, he hissed. I looked up at him calmly. Actually, it is. That was the last time I saw Trevor for 3 years. The immediate aftermath was even more satisfying than I'd anticipated. Word spread through the industry faster than I expected. Trevor's embezzlement and abusive behavior became office gossip at competing firms within days. His professional reputation was destroyed so thoroughly that he couldn't get hired anywhere. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding Davidson and Associates from the ground up. My first priority was hiring back every good employee Trevor had driven away. I called Bryce, who was working at a coffee shop and considering giving up on consulting entirely. I want you to come back, I told him, with a promotion and a 30% raise. But Trevor said, Trevor's gone, permanently, and I want to show you what he said about you behind closed doors. I played Bryce the recording of Trevor bragging about destroying him. Trevor's actual words were, that kid had potential, but I couldn't let him get too confident. Better to break them early before they become competition. Bryce was quiet for a long moment. He destroyed my confidence on purpose? Every bit of it, I confirmed. Your work was excellent. He just couldn't stand the thought of someone else succeeding. Bryce returned the following Monday. Within 6 months, he was leading his own projects and earning recognition from clients. The worthless employee Trevor had broken was actually one of our most talented consultants. I made similar calls to Kelly, Dennis, Madison, and 8 other former employees. 7 of them came back. The other one had found an even better position elsewhere, but thanked me for the vindication. Kelly, our graphic designer, broke down crying when I told her the truth about Trevor's systematic campaign against her. I thought I was losing my mind, she admitted. I kept thinking maybe I really was terrible at my job. Your work is exceptional, I told her. Trevor targeted you because you were too talented to ignore. Within a year, Kelly's designs were winning industry awards. Trevor's amateur garbage was being featured in national publications. But rebuilding the team was just the beginning. I also had to repair relationships with clients who'd been alienated by Trevor's behavior. I started by reaching out to every client we'd lost in the past 2 years. I explained what had happened, apologized for Trevor's conduct, and offered to fix any problems he'd created. Most were skeptical at first. Trevor had burned bridges so thoroughly that many assumed the entire company was corrupt. But I was persistent, and I had evidence to back up my claims. One client, Harrison Manufacturing, agreed to meet with me after I sent them recordings of Trevor mocking their provincial business practices and calling their CEO a small-town idiot who got lucky. We always suspected he looked down on us, their CEO told me, but we never imagined he was actually this contemptuous. Harrison Manufacturing became one of our biggest accounts within 6 months. The turnaround was dramatic. Employee satisfaction scores went from 2.1 out of 10 to 8.7 out of 10. Client retention improved by 340%. We started winning contracts again, including several from companies that had specifically avoided us during Trevor's reign. Bill Davidson was amazed by the transformation. I knew Trevor was a problem, he admitted, but I had no idea how much damage he was doing. The costs of toxic leadership are usually invisible until you remove it, I explained. Trevor wasn't just hurting individual employees, he was poisoning our entire reputation. Bill nodded thoughtfully. I should have acted sooner. I let family loyalty cloud my judgment. The important thing is that you acted when it mattered, I said. But the most satisfying part wasn't the professional success. It was watching our people flourish. Madison, our former receptionist, had been so traumatized by Trevor's abuse that she'd quit without notice and spent weeks convinced she was unemployable. When I called her back, she was working at a retail store and taking night classes. I don't think I'm cut out for office work, she said when I offered her a position. Trevor convinced you of that, I replied. But it wasn't true. You were excellent at your job. He just couldn't tolerate competence. Madison returned as our client services coordinator. Within 18 months, she was managing major accounts and had been promoted twice. The emotionally unstable teenager Trevor had tormented was actually a natural leader with exceptional people skills. Stories like Madison's became common. Employee after employee discovered that their supposed weaknesses had been manufactured by Trevor's psychological warfare. Dennis, our accountant, had been convinced he was terrible with numbers because Trevor constantly found errors in his work. It turned out Trevor was deliberately introducing mistakes into Dennis's reports to create excuses for criticism. I was starting to think I had some kind of learning disability, Dennis told me. My confidence was completely shot. Now Dennis was handling our most complex financial analysis and had caught several actual errors that could have cost us thousands. The pattern was clear. Trevor had systematically destroyed good people's confidence to make himself feel powerful. His victims weren't actually incompetent. They'd been psychologically manipulated into believing they were failures. 6 months into my new role, I received an unexpected phone call. "Is this the guy who took down Trevor Davidson?" An unfamiliar voice asked. "Who's asking?" "My name's Rodriguez. I work at Pinnacle Consulting. We heard about what happened over there. Pinnacle was one of our competitors." I wasn't sure where this conversation was heading. "Trevor applied for a position here last month," Rodriguez continued. "We did some background checking and found out about his situation." "I see. The thing is, we've been having problems with one of our senior managers. Similar patterns to what we heard about Trevor. Abuse, embezzlement, toxic behavior. We were wondering if you might be willing to consult on how to handle it." Over the next year, I received dozens of similar calls. Apparently, my takedown of Trevor had become legendary in local business circles. Companies started reaching out for advice on identifying and removing toxic leaders. I developed a consulting service specifically focused on workplace bullying and corporate abuse. The demand was overwhelming. Apparently, there were a lot of Trevors out there, and companies were finally starting to take the problem seriously. My brother, meanwhile, made a full recovery from his surgery. When I told him about the expanded business, he laughed. "So, Trevor's cruelty literally created a new career for you?" "Pretty much," I said. "His abuse was so systematic that I learned to recognize all the warning signs. That's the most poetic justice I've ever heard, but the best was yet to come. 2 years after Trevor's firing, I was contacted by the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Trevor's embezzlement at Davidson and Associates had been just the beginning. After losing his job, he'd become increasingly desperate and had started running more elaborate financial scams. He'd been arrested for defrauding investors in a fake consulting company, stealing money from a nonprofit he'd volunteered with, and running an elaborate Ponzi scheme targeting small business owners. "Your evidence from the Davidson case was crucial," the FBI agent explained. "It established a pattern of behavior that helped us build our case." Trevor was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, but even that wasn't the end of the story. 3 years after Trevor's firing, I decided to leave Davidson and Associates to start my own consulting firm. I'd learned everything I could from rebuilding the company, and I wanted to build something entirely new. Mr. Richardson from Meridian Industries was my first client. He'd kept my business card all this time, waiting for me to make my move. "I knew you'd start your own company eventually," he said. "Someone with your integrity and skills won't work for someone else forever." My new firm, Pinnacle Solutions, specialized in 2 areas: traditional business consulting and toxic workplace remediation. We helped companies identify and remove abusive leaders while rebuilding healthier organizational cultures. The business grew rapidly. Apparently, there was enormous demand for consultants who understood both the business and psychological aspects of workplace abuse. We landed 6 major contracts in our first year. By year 2, we had 12 employees and were turning down work. By year 3, we were one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Trevor's abuse had taught me everything I needed to know about toxic leadership. His victims had become my team members. His enemies had become my clients. His destruction had created the foundation for something much better. My brother, now a practicing trauma surgeon, often joked about the parallels between our careers. "You both fix things that are broken," he'd say. "I fix bodies, you fix companies." The principles are similar, I'd agree. Identify the problem, remove what's causing damage, help the healing process. 4 years after starting Pinnacle Solutions, something unexpected happened. Trevor applied for a job with us. I was reviewing applications for a junior consultant position when I saw his name. My stomach dropped, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. Trevor had been released from prison 6 months earlier. Under previous employment, he'd listed Davidson and Associates but conveniently omitted why he'd left. He'd also failed to mention the embezzlement conviction, which was a felony that should have disqualified him from most professional positions. I stared at the application for several minutes, trying to decide how to handle it. Then I smiled. I called him in for an interview. Trevor walked into my office the following Tuesday, looking older and considerably less polished than I remembered. Prison had not been kind to him. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting outfit from a discount store. His arrogant swagger had been replaced by nervous energy. When he saw me behind the desk, his face went through approximately 17 different emotions before settling on pure horror. "Hello, Trevor," I said pleasantly. "Please have a seat." He remained standing, clearly calculating whether he should run. "I think there might be some kind of mistake," he stammered. "No mistake," I said. "You applied for a position with Pinnacle Solutions. I'm the founder and CEO. Please sit down." Trevor reluctantly took the chair across from my desk. His hands were shaking slightly. "I didn't realize you'd started your own company," he said, trying to regain some composure. "Really? It's been pretty well covered in the trade publications. We're actually quite successful." I gestured around my office, which was larger and more elegantly appointed than Trevor's had ever been. "But let's talk about your application," I continued. "I notice you left out some important details about your time at Davidson and Associates." Trevor's eye twitched. "Same tell 4 years later." "I can explain." "Can you? Because I'm seeing a gap in your employment history from 2019 to 2023. What were you doing during that time?" We both knew exactly what he'd been doing, but I wanted to hear him say it. "I was between positions," he said finally. For 4 years? The market was challenging. I nodded, as if this made perfect sense. And I noticed you didn't mention your conviction for embezzlement and fraud. Trevor's face went white. That's in the past. I've learned from my mistakes. Have you? Tell me, what did you learn? For the next 20 minutes, I put Trevor through the same kind of psychological torture he'd inflicted on dozens of employees over the years. I questioned every aspect of his background, his qualifications, his character, and his future prospects. I used his own techniques against him, the loaded questions, the false concern, the systematic destruction of confidence. Every cruel trick he'd used to break good people, I deployed against him with surgical precision. By the end, Trevor was sweating, stammering, and visibly shaking. The predator had become prey, and he didn't know how to handle it. Trevor, I said finally, I think there's been a misunderstanding. His eye twitched again. You see, this company is built on principles of respect, integrity, and human dignity. We don't hire people who abuse others for personal satisfaction. I stood up and walked around my desk. More importantly, we don't hire convicted felons who lie on their applications. Trevor tried to speak, but I held up my hand. But I want to thank you, I continued. Your behavior at Davidson and Associates taught me everything I needed to know about toxic leadership. In a very real sense, you created this company. I gestured toward the wall, which displayed awards and recognition our firm had received for workplace culture and employee satisfaction. Every technique you used to destroy people, I learned to identify and counter. Every psychological weapon in your arsenal became part of my defense system. Trevor was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. Your victims became my team members. Your enemies became my clients. Your destruction became the foundation for something much better. I walked to the office door and opened it. I think you should leave now, I said calmly. Security will escort you out. As Trevor stumbled toward the door, I called after him with the same words he'd used on countless victims. Oh, and Trevor, I hope someone shows up for you. He left without looking back. That evening, I called my brother to tell him about the interview. He was finishing a particularly challenging surgery and needed some comic relief. You used his own techniques against him? He asked, laughing. Every single one. It was like watching a bully get beaten up by his own reflection. How did it feel? I thought about it for a moment. Satisfying, but also sad. He could have been something better if he'd chosen differently. Do you think he learned anything? Probably not. People like Trevor don't usually change. They just find new victims. My brother was quiet for a moment. You know what the best part is? He said finally. What? You didn't just get revenge. You built something that makes revenge unnecessary. He was right. The company I'd built treated employees with genuine respect, valued talent over politics, and actually helped our clients succeed. We'd created the kind of workplace Trevor had made impossible at Davidson and Associates. Our employee handbook specifically prohibited the behaviors Trevor had specialized in. We had zero tolerance for bullying, abuse, or psychological manipulation. New managers went through extensive training on recognizing and preventing toxic behavior. Most importantly, we created systems that empowered employees to report problems without fear of retaliation. No one would ever suffer in silence the way Trevor's victims had. 6 months after Trevor's humiliating interview, I received a call from a local reporter working on a story about workplace abuse in corporate America. I heard you've become something of an expert on toxic leadership, she said. I've had some experience with it, I replied. Would you be willing to share your story? We're trying to highlight how companies can address these problems. I agreed to the interview, but only on the condition that we focus on solutions rather than just problems. I didn't want the story to be about Trevor's downfall. I wanted it to be about what came after. The article, titled From Victim to Victor, How One Employee's Documentation Transformed Corporate Culture, was published in the business section of our major newspaper. It generated enormous response. Within weeks, I was getting calls from companies across the country asking for help with their own toxic leadership situations. Pinnacle Solutions expanded to offer workshops, training programs, and organizational assessments focused on preventing workplace abuse. The business grew beyond anything I'd imagined. We opened offices in 3 additional cities and developed partnerships with HR consulting firms nationwide. Our methodology for identifying and addressing toxic leadership became an industry standard. But the most rewarding part wasn't the business success. It was the stories from people we'd helped. A woman in Seattle wrote to thank us for helping her company remove an abusive manager who'd been making her life miserable for years. A young man in Denver credited our training program with giving him the tools to stand up to workplace bullying. A team in Miami told us how our consulting had transformed their toxic department into one of the most productive in their company. Each story reminded me why this work mattered. Trevor's victims hadn't been weak or incompetent. They'd been good people trapped in a system that protected abusers. By changing those systems, we could prevent other people from suffering the same way. 5 years after starting Pinnacle Solutions, I was invited to speak at a national conference on workplace culture. The audience included CEOs, HR directors, and organizational psychologists from major corporations. During my presentation, I told the story of Trevor's rise and fall, focusing on the systemic issues that had allowed his abuse to continue unchecked. I explained how documentation, strategic planning, and systematic change could transform toxic workplaces into healthy ones. During the question and answer session, a woman in the audience raised her hand. How do you prevent toxic leaders from just moving to other companies and repeating the same behavior? It was an excellent question, and one I'd been thinking about for years. The key is industry-wide accountability, I replied. When companies do thorough background checks, verify references honestly, and share information about problem employees, toxic leaders can't just hop from job to job. I explained how our firm maintained a database of documented workplace abusers, not for revenge, but to help companies make informed hiring decisions. Trevor Davidson, the manager I mentioned, tried to get hired at several companies after his termination. Because we documented his behavior and shared that information appropriately, he was unable to find another position where he could abuse people. Another audience member asked about the legal implications of sharing such information. Everything we document is factual and verifiable, I explained. We don't share opinions or rumors, only documented evidence of behavior that violated company policies or laws. The conference was a huge success. Several major corporations hired us to implement our toxicity prevention programs. Business magazines wrote articles about our methodology. Universities began teaching case studies based on our work. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 2 months later when I received a LinkedIn message from Bryce. I just got promoted to senior partner at my firm, he wrote. I wanted to thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. If you hadn't shown me what Trevor really thought about my work, I might never have regained my confidence. Attached was a photo from his promotion celebration. He looked happy, confident, and successful. Everything Trevor had tried to convince him he could never be. That's when I realized the true scope of what we'd accomplished. We hadn't just removed one toxic leader, we'd created a model for organizational healing that was spreading throughout the business world. The quiet assistant who'd once absorbed Trevor's abuse had become a voice for workplace justice. The documentation project that started as self-defense had evolved into a movement for systemic change. My boss had used his position to humiliate everyone beneath him. But in the end, his downfall came from someone he never saw coming. Not because I was invisible, but because he'd underestimated the power of patient, strategic resistance. Trevor thought he was destroying people for sport. Instead, he was teaching us how to fight back, and we'd learned the lesson well.